Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. My name's Rebecca and I'm going to be taking you through today's tutorial. If you're joining us for the first time, you're very welcome, and if you're a regular, welcome back. Now if you are a regular, you will know that our prompts appear on Friday over on Instagram, and it's the second week in August, so we're using a word prompt this week, and a prompt is the word creatures. I'm going to be carrying on with the hot colours that we started with last week, and it couldn't be more appropriate because we're experiencing a second extreme heat wave here in the UK, and that must have been in my mind when I came up with today's project. I'm going to keep it really simple this week. You're not going to need many resources. Obviously your 10cm square piece of felt for your base with a centimetre border marked all the way around, a small piece of fabric, some Bondaweb if you have it, if not, don't worry, you can manage without, and some 6-strand embroidery threads. I'm also going to use pearl cotton. If you don't have that, don't worry, 6-strand embroidery threads will work just fine. And because it's me, I'm going to throw in some beads there at the end, so if you have some beads, great. If not, don't worry, you can use buttons, sequins, or even French knots and bullion knots if that works for you. So grab all your bits and pieces and let's get stitching. My first idea this week was to create a sort of lizard using maybe a sandy colour for the background, and then adding some of our stitches of the month as decoration on the back of the lizard. If you saw the prompt photo, you would have seen that I use lots of animal skins, and I wanted to play around with that idea. And I really like this idea, but my subscription of Love Embroidery magazine dropped through the letterbox this week, and there's a lizard in it, and I didn't want to repeat something from a magazine or something that you can find an idea for elsewhere. And I was also worried that the pattern would be too small to really make the most of our stitches. My next idea was an octopus, and I thought our cup stitch would make great suckers for the tentacles, but again with this one I thought it would have to be so small that it would be hard to really make the most of our stitches. So then I thought about maybe doing a close-up just of the tentacles and just focusing on maybe the underside of the octopus where you can see all the suckers. But as I was sketching it, again, I thought these are going to have to be so small, and actually, is it going to make a really pleasant design? I thought it looked quite good, but I couldn't see that this would work very well in fabric and stitch. And although I quite like the sketch and the shaping, and particularly this curl here, it just wasn't floating my boat. So I thought about it a bit more, thought about what animals are patterned, and I did a bit of research on patterned animals and had a look back at the prompt photo, and I thought, what about a snake? And it might not be when you think about creatures, a snake might not be the first thing that springs to mind, but I was trying to think about something that would work with our hot colours prompt, and I thought this could work really nicely if we used our sandy background again and then chose a really interesting fabric for the snake, and thought these circles might look good in either a blanket stitch wheel or Rhodes stitch. And then we've got our crow's foot stitch as well that we can do, and I wondered about doing some bands with sheaf stitch, and this seemed to present lots of opportunities for doing something interesting with our stitches. And then I thought, what about the empty space? I thought, what about creating some desert flowers, almost like succulent flowers, and then we could put some leaves in with fishbone stitch and use our cup stitch for some flower heads just to add a little bit of decoration, or we could do this with sequins or buttons, something like that. So this is the idea that I'm going to go with. I thought I'd keep it fairly simple. So I've got this mustard coloured felt for my background. I've marked out my centimetre border all the way around, and if you want to replicate this exactly, this colour is in our autumn rainbow roll. And I've fished out, I had a little scrap of fabric that I got out of a scraps pack on eBay, I think, and I thought this one was great for our hot colours. It's got that lovely sort of russety brown background and then all these really spicy oranges and yellows, so I thought that would work really well. And I've gone ahead and traced out my snake onto a piece of Bondaweb. I will put a pattern on our website. I'll put the address at the bottom of the screen and I'll put a link in the description below. And I've gone ahead and stuck some Bondaweb on the back, on the wrong side of the fabric, so that that's ready. If you're not sure about Bondaweb and need some pointers on how to use it, I'll put a link to a video at the top of the screen there. You can just click on the card and that will take you to a video where I explain Bondaweb in a bit more detail. It's basically a fusible fabric glue that's double-sided, so there's a paper side that you draw your shape on, and then there's a rough side which is the glue, and you draw your shape, cut it out roughly. I think you can probably see that I've just cut roughly around it, and you iron it onto the wrong side of your fabric, and then you just simply cut it out. I'll show you this stage because I'm here. Now, there's lots of twists and turns in this snake, so my best tip, I'm using paper scissors here because I'm cutting through paper. My best tip is to use right down near the hinge of the scissors and keep your fabric there, and don't move the scissors but turn the fabric. So you gradually cut very slowly, trying to keep your fabric right down towards the hinge of the scissors, and you turn your fabric rather than turning your scissors, and you can get a really accurate cut with very smooth curves. The trick with curves is to not really ever use the tip of your scissors. If you use the tip, you will get barbs, like snip marks, and we want to try and avoid that. Now, Bondaweb has multiple benefits. One, it glues things down, which is the main reason we're using it, but it also, because it's a glue, it's going to bond the fibres of the fabric together, and so it sort of reduces the amount of fraying that happens. So when you've cut out your shape, you just peel off the paper, and that can, I think, go in your recycling. And then we're just going to lay our shape. So I'm going to position the head first. So the head went in the corner like that, and then the rest of the snake fitted around. So I'm just going to manipulate that a little bit just so that it fits. When you're happy with the positioning, just press down with a fairly hot iron. I've used paper just to save any glue going onto my iron. So that has now melted the glue again on the back of the fabric. So we melt it once to stick it to the fabric, and then we take the paper off and we melt it again to fuse the fabric to your background. Now, because it's such a thick fabric and it's going onto felt, that isn't a permanent bond. If you're sticking cotton to cotton, it makes a really secure bond. But when you are attaching rough fabrics to each other, or very thick fabrics to each other, you are going to need some stitching as well. So that's going to hold it in place just long enough for us to get some stitching on. So that's our snake started. I've also got, I thought I'd just take you around the resources that I'm working with today. I've just picked out some thread colours from the fabric that I was using. So these are the colours. I've pretty much matched up the colours that are in, and I've added in a green just to make our leaves when the time comes. and I couldn't find a decent pink that matched, that was hot rather than a cold pink. So I've got a pink pearl cotton, and I actually think this will be better. I was thinking I could do the desert flowers with this, and I think pearl cotton will be better for our cup stitch anyway, so that's what I'm going to use for that. And then I've got just some hot coloured beads. I've got a little bead mix here, just of beads in hot colours. I may or may not use them. I quite like the gold ones that are in there, because they might make it look a little bit like pebbles or stone if we interpret this as sand. So we're going to keep it very simple today, and I've just got a very limited number of resources. So I'm going to start off just by helping that Bondaweb a little bit, and I'm just going to do a line of tacking stitches down the back of the snake just to keep it secure. So I've just got a little bit of machine cotton that I just had on my desk, and if I keep these stitches fairly large, it will make it easy to remove them if I want to at the end. I'm thinking that these will be mostly covered. Okay, so I have tacked down my snake now, and so I thought it would be good to sketch in a bit of a pattern. Thought we could start by just marking in some shapes. So let's put in some triangles, and I'm just going to put a band in every now and again, and then I want to circle here and there as well. So I'm going to make it fairly regular, but I'm sort of playing with the shapes as they go around the curves of the snake. It's going to be fairly geometric because so many of our stitches are. I'm going to start off with this yellow thread. I noticed that the bit of fabric that I had cut out for the snake didn't have very much yellow on it, so I thought I wanted to get some bright yellow back in. I'm going to start off by adding in some sheaf stitch bands on the snake. So if you're not sure about any of the stitches that I'm going to use, our August stitch guide has all of them in, and I will put a link in a card at the top of the screen so that you can go and find that. So sheaf stitch is basically just 3 straight stitches next to each other, and then you take a horizontal stitch that sort of wraps over the top and it pulls them in to the centre. And although it's not best practice, I'm not going to keep finishing off and starting off my thread, so I'm going to have some trailing threads at the back. None of it will be on show, and the felt can take any sort of knots and trailing stitches because it's so thick. Just be careful if you're doing these sheaf stitch bands, don't pull too tight, otherwise you will pull your snake up from the surface of your fabric and cause him to sort of fold in on himself. So I'm trying to just pull it through enough to flatten the thread, but not enough to pull the fabric, if that makes sense. So they're my sheaf stitches. I'm going to work all the way along the snake with those, and then we'll come back and put in some more. Okay, so that's my sheaf stitches in, and I quite like them all together at the end there. I think that looks quite cute. So now I thought we'd do the circles, and I thought a Rhodes stitch might be nice, so we'll give it a try. And I had this idea of doing a sort of gradient down the snake. So I've got a dark red here. I should say this is all 6 strand embroidery thread, and I'm using 2 strands each time. So what worries me about this is that I'm working very close to the edge of the fabric and I don't want to cause it to fray too much. So again, Rhodes stitch is in our August stitch guide, and we're basically doing straight stitches that cross the full diameter of the circle, and we're just working our way around. And as we work our way around, this sort of twist effect happens at the centre that looks really lovely. Just trying so hard not to cause too much fraying. I've probably chosen the wrong fabric again, but I just liked it so much. I'll just finish off this one Rhodes stitch and then I'll show you the effects. Another one of our stitches that you could use for a circular shape would be the blanket stitch wheel. It's a lot easier to get a really nice finish with a blanket stitch wheel. So there's my Rhodes stitch. So you can see that there's a sort of twist there in the centre. If I angle it, you probably can see it a lot better. And that just forms as you're rotating around with your stitches. So I'm going to repeat that for each of the circles, and I'm going to do my next one in the red and then orange, gold, yellow, and I think that's it all the way down. So I'll come back when I've put those in. Okay, so I've got all my Rhodes stitches in. I basically went dark red, red, orange, gold, orange, red, and then we'll do some dark red down here as well just to balance it out. So now I thought we could work on our triangles. Yeah, let's start up here. So I've got 2 strands of my hot purple, and I'm just gonna do, let's try a crow's foot. So I've put in a couple of crow's feet. I'm wondering whether they are too small to really get the effect, so I'm gonna have a bit of a play down here. I'm wondering if a Sprat's head might be a more effective stitch, so let's give a Sprat's head a whirl. So the difference is that a crow's foot is worked on all 3 sides and a Sprat's head is only worked on 2. So let's see how a Sprat's head works. Yeah, that's worked a lot better. So I'm going to use that stitch for the rest of the time. I think if I try and unpick the fabric that I've used for the snake is just going to shred, so I'm going to just leave it. Okay, so I'm going to put the rest of those in and then we'll come back and think about foliage. Put all my Sprat's head stitches in all the way down, and I was thinking it was looking a bit too purple, so I've just experimented here and I think I quite like it. So all I'm doing is adding, I've got my dark red, so I felt like we needed a bit more of that, and I'm just adding just straight stitches around the edge of my Sprat's heads, and that is just framing those triangles and toning down the purple a little bit, and it also brings a little bit more of that dark red into our design. So I'm just going to add that to all of my triangles. I've started with a tiny little bit of thread thinking I wouldn't like it. And now I've got to change it straight away. And I thought I would just put, because we want to balance out this dark red up here, I thought I would just put a little sort of tip on the tail of the snake, just with some straight stitches. I'm not worrying about them being close together. So I'll just put 3 across. I think I'm just going to go back and put 1 in each space. It might look nice to just have 1 long straight stitch down the centre, just like that, just almost like a little rattle at the end there. So because it's bigger, I'm going to have another go at a crow's foot on the snake's head. And I'm wondering whether it's going to be better to do a single strand here, just so that we can get the effect of the crow's foot. So I think we've got our patterns on our snake now, so we can start thinking about our foliage. And I'm just going to use my circle template to guide me a little bit. So I'm marking rough thirds, and then I'm going to mark in some leaf shapes. So I think we'll start with the leaves. Now we're not worrying about our fabric fraying, we should be able to get these done quite quickly. So I'm doing this in Fishbone stitch, which isn't unlike a Sprat's head really. Once you've got the hang of them, they're quite quick to do. This is sometimes called leaf stitch because it's so good for stitching leaves. You just have to be really careful not to pull your thread too tight, because it will distort your base fabric. So I'll put the rest of those in off camera, and then our last little detail is our cup stitch, and for that I'm going to use some pearl cotton. So I've got this lovely magenta pearl cotton, and the first thing we do is stitch in our 3 bars. So that's why I've marked in rough thirds on the circle. It's not the end of the world if you haven't got exact thirds, but we're just going to do what we can. So now I'm going to come up here and I'm going to create some blanket stitch around. I'm just going to do 3 blanket stitches on each bar. Give a much clearer and slower tutorial for this in our stitch guide, so if I'm going too fast, don't panic, because that video that I linked earlier will show you much more clearly. So I'm chancing it a little bit because this is quite a big cup that I'm making here, and I'm hoping it will pull round to circular. So now I'm back to my starting point, and this time I'm going to make blanket stitches through the first layer of blanket stitches. So I'm getting my needle in between the vertical parts of the stitch, and then we're just going to catch back in our first part of the stitch, and it is a little bit triangular, that one, but we'll cheat a little bit. And I'm just going to put in a little catching stitch just to hold the bits of my flower where I want them to be. You won't be able to see this, I'm just going to push out those sides a little bit. There we go, and actually, why not? See, I wonder if my needle will go through. Let's put a bead. Maybe a gold one. Let's put a bead at the centre, and that will also help to push it out and make it rounder. There we go. So I'm going to make this one much smaller. So I'm just going to put in the rest of those little flowers, and then we'll come back and look at the finished piece. Put in my flowers and leaves, and I thought the last little thing I wanted to do was just add in some more beads, just to create almost like stones or pebbles, just to help create a bit of an environment for our little snake to be in. So I've got a beading needle here and a single strand of the mustard, and I'm just going to dot some beads, a little bit like what we did with the beach scene. I'm focusing mostly on gold beads, I think. I've got some different shades of gold and different sizes as well, so I'm just going to dot them around here and there, and I think it will just add a little bit of life to the scene and just make it look finished rather than abandoned. I don't know what it is about adding beads, but they're just, for me, they just make a piece look finished, or they just add that little bit of something that was missing. I don't know whether it's the way that they reflect light, or I don't know. I'm a big fan. That's all I'm going to say. Big fan of a few beads. So there's our finished piece. Bring it up to the camera so you can see it up a bit closer. So we've got our snake with our stitches of the month. A little bit scruffy because my fabric was fraying more than I would have liked, but we've added in quite a lot of our stitches of the month there. So we've got our cup stitch, we've got our fishbone stitch, we've got crow's feet, we've got Sprat's head, Rhodes stitch, and Sheaf stitch. So we have managed to get quite a lot of them in there. There we go. So, hope you've enjoyed that. Do share your creations at #FSHWingingIt, and so that we can see all these pieces together, all our creatures pieces together. You can also add #FSHWingingIt33, and that will create a little cluster of those over on Instagram for you to go and have a look at. If you've enjoyed this piece and want to do something similar, I'll link a video here, and I'll put a video up here that's best for you. If you want to subscribe, click on the button over here, and that'll make it really easy for you. Happy crafting, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!